So we just got back from our last tournament of the season, and there's a bit of advice that in judging debates over the weekend, both the novice and the open division, I was giving over and over and over again. So I put it down on my list of things to do some skills work, especially with our novices, and make sure that we're doing a really, really solid job of this. And it got me to thinking about two different skills that I try to teach people to get good at instinctively because they help a lot in debate, many different formats, and they also help a lot in impromptu speaking and extemp as well. The first of these I would call boiling it down. Let me explain what advice I was giving all weekend. I was talking to people about how when they were going through the line by line and answering their opponent's arguments, the ratio of time that they spent identifying the opponent's arguments versus making their own and explaining their own argument was way out of whack. They were taking way too long walking their way back through their opponent's argument, almost as though with all that talk, so my opponent then says that the Occupy movement had all kinds of successes in 2011 and those all set the stage for them to be successful in the 2012 election, and I would say that's far too long-winded when you are just describing what your opponent said. I think what they're doing is they're trying to pull the argument out of their memory, and what they wrote down on their flow has become cryptic, but they have to impose iron self-discipline on themselves. What I teach my own debaters to do is when you hear an argument that sort of expands into a cloud like that, you come up with a 2 or 3 word tag. They say Occupy 2011 successes. I say first, and then off you go with your first argument. And really what that lets you do, especially in IPDA or possibly for you in Lincoln Douglas, in some of the shorter speeches where your opponent has a time advantage, and also in policy in the 1AR, is you don't have to speak rapidly, but you can just use the time that you have very, very efficiently. It's an investment of time that piles up. If every time you identify your opponent's argument, you're taking 3 or 4 seconds in not really building up your side of the debate, not substantiating your own arguments, but you're giving away increments like that dozens of times each speech to just re-explaining their argument, then that adds up. That could be a substantial chunk of a minute of your speech. And really, if you think about it, if the argument that your opponent made wasn't clear the first time and you make it more clear and you make it more memorable to the judge by coherently repeating it, then that's really just giving time away to help your opponent, which you definitely don't want to do. So if you can get good at labeling the argument so that the judge can recognize it, but not repeating the argument, that's a more efficient use of your time. That's also balancing which subjects you address in the speech in a way that favors you a lot more. So what I've done in the past, we play this as a game whenever we have little bits of spare time. If we're on a van trip, the tournament's a long drive away, what I'll do is I will hold on to, sometimes when people are cutting cards, what I used to do is if I found kind of a long-winded 3 or 4 sentence long explanation for an idea that could have been a lot simpler, I would keep a stack of those, and whoever was writing shotgun could read them out to the people in the van, and then the people in the van would have to respond instantly with a 3-word tag. They'd have to listen and boil it down. Boil it down. That is a fundamental skill. One of the things that you need to do if you are giving the 1AR, if you are giving an impromptu speech and you suddenly realize you have less time than you thought you did, you know that beginning debaters, what they will do, and beginning speakers as well, when they have an idea that they're not really sure about, they will try to talk the thought out and they'll go looping round and round it, each time improving on the wording a little bit, getting closer to what they mean, but they don't really cut to the heart of the matter on the first try. And what happens with a lot of experience, what happens with seasoning, is you learn how to spot the idea that you're trying to get out and put it into words and do all of that on the first try. And when you get good at that, that's when you speak with a lot more impact. That's when you're a lot more direct and assertive. Not only does it waste less time, and that's an advantage, but it also, it's more of a persuasive, dominant behavior as a speaker. It gives you more impact. It gives you more forcefulness. So we would do boiling it down drill, both for identifying the opponent's arguments and also when you had an explanation that you needed to make and you needed to limit the time that you spent on it without necessarily speaking rapidly. That was a way to do it, boiling it down. The other drill that I teach, and I'll back up and say, what I would sometimes do with young debaters, right after their opponent had given a speech and they were about to have to answer it, I would stop and I would say, okay, tag drill. Tell me, go down this portion of the flow, tell me what's your 3-word tag for every argument they made. And I make sure, sometimes what I would have them do, if they'd written down a lot of words, or several words in identifying the argument, that they could only underline 2 or at the most 3. And that was the name they were going to call the argument, and that's all I would let them. And I'd make them re-give a portion of the speech if they were using too many words on the opponent's arguments. And I would tell them, don't re-argue your opponent's case. With a few words, you can identify, and you can let me know where you are, and that's sufficient. And learn that as a habit. Now, the other game, and this is kind of similar because it was the other game we would play sometimes when we had just a little bit of spare time. We called it the transition game, and we would have everybody in the van or everybody sitting at the dinner table come up with one random opinion that they had to hold squarely in their mind for a minute. And then we would ask the first person, what's your random opinion? And ask the second person, what's your random opinion? And someone in the group had to come up with a transition between them that showed a relationship between those two ideas. And then whoever had come up with the transition got to state their random opinion, and someone in the group had to transition from the second to the third. They then got to offer up their random opinion, and we would bounce all the way around the group. And what that did, when you did it enough times, it got to where it became a habit of thinking, a very good habit of thinking, for people to be able to pop out segues and smooth transitions on the spur of the moment. They then got to where they could do it in impromptu speeches, and they could even do it in some very entertaining and aesthetically pleasing ways in the middle of a debate speech. So, there are little fundamental skill drills that you can work on, boiling it down, not taking too many words to get to the heart of a matter, and not taking too many words to identify your opponent's argument. And then making transitions something that you do naturally, something that you're so familiar with. There's an image I use a lot when people who are new to speaking ask, how can you be so comfortable up there? I say, if you've ever seen a piano player who's played the piano for years and years and years, and they can just noodle around on the keyboard, it's because their fingers know the keyboard so well. And after you have been in speaking situations for a very long time, and nothing substitutes for experience and repetition, especially if it's repetition of good habits, not bad habits, you get to where your brain knows the speaking situation and you have that level of familiarity. And building in skills like smooth transitions and segues and being able to reduce what you say and cut right to the heart of it the first time instead of talking round and round it, those are some of those fundamentals that can make you in unexpected, spontaneous speaking situations really effective. And that includes debate, that includes impromptu, that also just includes the rest of your adult life. So if those drills are useful to you, then I hope that you will see down the road improved success both in the competitive setting and outside of it.